They said I was dead. A single phone call, that's all it took. One call to a distant cousin, one message left with my estranged sister. And the lie ignited like dry kindling. By the time it reached the papers, my name, Marina Hale, was etched in the obituaries with more poetry than I'd ever been granted in life. But I wasn't dead. I was very much alive, crouched in a dim motel room on the edge of a nowhere town, with bruises blooming along my ribs, silence ringing louder than any ambulance siren, and the distinct taste of betrayal curdling in the back of my throat. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan. Their plan. And I was the inconvenient piece they tried to erase. Let me rewind. I was never the kind of woman people expected to disappear. I was poised. I was present. I was married to one of the most prominent financial attorneys in Boston, had a name that graced charity boards and wine-soaked gala invitations. Marina Hale wasn't the kind of name that faded. But that's the thing about power, it's only real if everyone agrees to believe in it. And the moment I stopped playing my role, the loving, quiet wife who never asked where the late-night calls led or why our joint account had whispers of funds vanishing, the mask cracked. And behind it, my husband, Charles Hale, and my sister, Vivian. Yes, my own sister. They weren't subtle. I think they believed I'd snap quietly, that I'd drink myself into invisibility like our mother did, or fade under scandal, or beg to be let back into the life they were chiseling me out of. But I didn't. I did something worse. I noticed the first sign was the will. Charles had always been meticulous about paperwork. But one night, when he was in Chicago on business, I found a document in his desk, a new draft of his will. Only, it wasn't his name alone on the signature line. It was mine too, except I never signed it. My signature, elegant, curved, slightly slanted to the right, was copied but lifeless, forged. Beneath it, a clause in the event of Marina Hale's death. All assets, shares, and properties would be transferred to Vivian Cole for administrative purposes. Vivian. My sister. It should have stopped me cold. But something inside me, the old part of me that used to protect Vivian when our father raged, the sister who once shared my twin bed during storms, wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Until the brake lines on my car failed 2 days later. I survived. I shouldn't have. The mechanic later told me the lines were cut clean, not worn. I didn't tell the police. I told no one. Because when the people trying to kill you are the same ones planning your funeral, you don't call 911. You get quiet. You disappear. So I did. I booked a room under a false name, paid in cash, ditched my phone, and vanished. I watched the news 3 days later. A body had been found, burned beyond recognition in a car with my plates, wearing a coat I'd donated weeks ago. Dental records, they said. But I'd had extensive dental work redone that same year in Italy, a detail only I remembered. They buried that girl as me, and Vivian gave the eulogy. I watched the live stream of my own funeral from a motel lobby. She wore black, of course, not the cheap kind. Designer. Her voice trembled as she spoke about my kindness, my generosity, and tragic tendency to trust the wrong people. Charles stood beside her, eyes damp, chin tucked low. The performance was exquisite. I saw through it because I had written it. It was a draft I'd scribbled for a fictional story 3 years ago. Vivian had found it in my notebook and laughed. Now she was reciting it word for word. They didn't just bury me, they staged me, scripted me. And now, they were about to split a 7-figure estate, liquidate assets, and erase my name from every legacy I had helped build. They thought the fire erased me, but they underestimated the part of me that had been waiting for this. The woman who learned to read fine print by moonlight while Charles snored beside me. The woman who had memorized every login, every passcode, every flaw in their plan because I had once trusted both of them blindly. And betrayal teaches you to see in the dark. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to wait. And when they were at their highest, when they felt untouchable, I would crash their illusion. Not with fire, not with fists, with something more terrifying. Proof. My real death would have been a mercy, but what they didn't realize was that I had already died once in that marriage. What came back wasn't the Marina they thought they could manipulate. It was someone reborn through fire, betrayal, and silence. They declared me dead, so I made a vow I would attend my own funeral. And I wouldn't leave empty-handed. They thought they buried me with a forged signature. But the irony, the empire they were fighting over the properties, the holdings, the trusts still whispered my name in every legal thread. Because while Charles had always been the face, the voice, the charming litigator in the press, I was the hand beneath the desk that built everything. And I never signed away control. Not truly, not legally, not in any way that would hold up when the lights came on and the real paperwork walked back into the room. The second week after my death, I took a bus into the city, not a plane, not a train, a bus that reeked of diesel, of sweat and stories no one wanted to tell. I wore a gray wig, glasses. My face was still swollen from the accident, ironic how their attempt on my life became my best disguise. I checked into a women's shelter under the name Marta Wynne. I told them I'd escaped a violent husband. That part was true, just not in the way they thought. They gave me tea, a cot, safety, and Wi-Fi. That was all I needed. I started with the firm, Hale Coleman Partners, our joint legacy, a boutique legal firm with high society clientele and dirty, buried secrets. Charles had named me co-founder when we were still in love, still pretending to be a power couple instead of two strangers posing for magazine spreads. But that title came with more than just a nameplate. It came with back-end access. And what Charles never realized, what most powerful men forget, is that the woman sitting quietly beside them at the boardroom dinners is usually the one who set the table. I had built the original shell of the firm's trust accounts. I had memorized the server's backdoor password. I still had the USB drive in my coat pocket when I crashed my car. It survived. So did I. That wasn't luck. That was design. On my second night in the shelter, I plugged in. There it was, the ledger, the timeline, the proof, dozens of transfers, small at first, then bold moving money from our foundation to shell accounts in Switzerland. Accounts opened under V, Hale, Vivian. She didn't even have the decency to keep her maiden name while stealing my life. She just used mine like it was an old scarf she found in the attic. The money trail wasn't hidden. It was messy, desperate. They didn't expect anyone to come looking, because, again, I was dead. But death gives you freedom. Freedom to dig, to spy, to reach into places they would have never let Marina Hale touch when she was alive. That week, I accessed the internal communications archive, found the emails, the agreements, the NDA. Vivian signed the week before the accident, the one where she claimed power of attorney over my affairs due to mental instability. A lie. A forged report, a psychiatrist I'd never even met. I searched his name, Dr. Eli Rowan. He didn't exist. That was when I stopped feeling heartbroken and started feeling sharp. There's something clean about revenge when it's done in silence. No screaming, no glass breaking, just a slow, cold pulling of threads until their entire tapestry collapses around them. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a courtroom, a stage where truth wears heels and evidence. But first, I needed the final piece. The original will. The one Charles and I had signed 2 years prior. Still legal. Still binding unless a death certificate and notarized amendments proved otherwise. They forged mine, but I knew where the real one was kept. It wasn't in our house. Charles would have cleared every drawer. No, it was in the vault at Lexington Reserve, a private storage facility we'd used for our most sensitive documents. Charles hated that place, called it my little bunker. But he never canceled the lease. Good, because I still had the key. It was cold the morning I went. The wind hissed like it knew my secret. I walked past the security camera like a ghost in a hoodie. No one noticed. No one looked twice. Inside, beneath old photo albums and trust binders, was the will, signed, stamped, sealed in my real, inked signature. I held it like a lifeline, because it was. This piece of paper said I was still alive, and everything they built on my grave was mine. I left the vault shaking, not from fear, from the weight of the next move. The will gave me legal standing, the documents gave me evidence, but I needed witnesses. So I called someone I had avoided for years. My former mentor, Judge Elaine Mercer. She answered on the third ring. Elaine, I whispered. A pause. Then a gasp. Marina. Yes, I said. But not for long. I need your help. They declared me dead. Another pause. I know, I was at the funeral. Silence passed between us like a wound. Then she said quietly, "Where do we begin?" That night, I sat on the floor of the shelter's tiny kitchen, staring at the will. I thought about how Charles used to kiss my forehead and say, "You make the world beautiful just by being in it." How Vivian used to braid my hair when we were girls and say, "I wish I could be you." They weren't lies then. But time distorts love when greed walks into the room. I folded the will back into its folder. I labeled it in red ink funeral gift. They wanted a ceremony. They wanted closure. They wanted Marina Hale buried and forgotten. Fine. I would give them a funeral they would never forget. But I wouldn't come as a corpse. I would come as the executor. And this time, I would be the one delivering the eulogy. I watched the ink dry on the invitation before I slipped it back into the envelope. There it was, embossed in silver in loving memory of Marina Hale, followed by a date, a time, and a location I knew too well. They were holding a second service, a public one, a staged one, for the press, for the donors, for the image. The first funeral, the quiet family-only one, had done the work of settling the estate. But this was a performance, and I was ready to steal the stage. Charles always loved appearances. That was his addiction. It wasn't enough to erase me quietly. He needed to be seen doing it with sorrow in his eyes and a speech in his hands. Vivian, of course, would stand next to him in a black velvet sheath dress, tears rehearsed, voice trembling, maybe even a poem this time. They didn't expect to see me, not because I was dead, but because even when I was alive, I had trained them to believe I would never interrupt. But grief rewrites the rules. Or rather, resurrection does. I arrived 2 hours early. The venue was the Whitlock Gallery, the same place Charles once held his retirement party from litigation, even though we both knew he'd never retire. Power was his oxygen. The air inside was cold, polished, smelled of wax and old money. Staff were setting up white roses. They didn't notice me as I walked past with a delivery clipboard, blazer collar turned up, cap pulled low. They never looked twice at the help. That was always their mistake. Behind the curtain near the stage, I waited. I could hear the guests arriving. Footsteps, camera clicks, hushed condolences that were less grief and more curiosity. She was so young. What a tragedy. Wasn't there a fire? Yes, there was, just not the one you thought. Charles spoke first. Marina was the love of my life. He began. She was elegance. She was compassion. And she was troubled. I felt my knuckles crack silently. Vivian sniffled beside him, her voice tight. She wanted to change the world. But sometimes, the brightest flames burn out the fastest. Flames. They were really leaning into that metaphor. I almost laughed. But I didn't come here for anger. I came here for precision. Behind the curtain, I opened my folder. Inside, the original will, dated, notarized, signed by both Charles and me. The financial statements, showing the movement of funds to Vivian's offshore accounts. The psychiatric forgery, with a non-existent doctor's signature. And lastly, a court motion already pre-filed through Judge Mercer's network. Marked urgent. Marked explosive. I wasn't just walking in as a widow reborn, I was walking in as a plaintiff. At precisely 10:43 a.m., just as Charles said my name again, I stepped out. No fanfare, no lights, just heels on marble. And silence that followed like a dropped glass in a cathedral. Heads turned. I didn't speak. Not yet. I walked past rows of white-clad mourners, their mouths open, half in horror, half in disbelief. Vivian turned last. When our eyes met, her face went gray, not pale, not shocked, gray, like oxygen had abandoned her. Charles froze mid-sentence. I climbed the steps, turned to the crowd, then I said 5 words, "Thank you all for coming." Gasps. A woman fainted in the back row. Someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" Another, "Is it a twin?" But I kept going. My name is Marina Hale. I am not dead, but I have returned for everything that is mine. I laid the folder on the podium, clicked the clasp, opened it slow. Before you continue mourning, perhaps you'd like to see the real will, or the fake psychiatric record. Or the email Vivian sent instructing the bank to liquidate my charitable trust and wire it to a Swiss account under her alias. Vivian stepped forward. Marina, wait. We thought you what I said, my voice cutting like a scalpel. You thought I died, or you made sure I would. The room went still. Even the air held its breath. I turned to Charles. And you? How long were you planning to wear that ring and play the grieving widower before you transferred my voting rights at Hale Coleman to yourself? He opened his mouth, closed it, and in that moment, I knew something deep. He had never feared me while I was alive. Only now, risen from their script, did I become dangerous. Security approached the stage. One of them whispered, "Ma'am, this isn't I have legal standing," I said. "Motion filed under Judge Elaine Mercer. Check your inbox." He paused, checked his phone, stopped moving. I turned back to the crowd. For years, I stood beside two people who claimed to love me while quietly carving me out of my own life. They wrote my eulogy before I ever left the room. And when they failed to kill me in the car, they sabotaged. They chose to do it on paper. I raised the motion, but paper works both ways. I stepped off the stage and walked straight through the aisle. No one stopped me. They parted like water. Outside, the wind was sharp, freezing, but it felt like breath again. The assistant from the courthouse was waiting by a black car. She handed me a phone. "Judge Mercer wants a word," she said. I took it. "Are they still breathing?" Elaine asked dryly. "Barely," I replied. "You've got 48 hours. After that, the court will take over. Use the time wisely." I hung up. I didn't cry. Didn't smile, just got in the car and closed the door. I didn't go back to the shelter that night. I booked a suite at the Fairmont under my maiden name. When I stepped into the elevator, I looked at my reflection for the first time in weeks. No makeup, no glamour, just a woman they tried to erase. And failed. I wasn't done. This was only the curtain rising. Vivian and Charles were about to realize that I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to reclaim the legacy they built on my grave. And I wasn't going to bury them. I was going to let the truth do it for me. There's a sound that doesn't leave you. It's not the crash of metal, not the scream of brakes. It's the silence just before impact when you realize someone wants you gone. I heard that silence again when I stepped into the courtroom. Not because of fear, because in that room, at that moment, I was still supposed to be dead. And yet, there I stood heels steady, posture composed, folder in hand, ready to take the one thing they thought I'd never reach again. My voice. It had taken 2 weeks to get here. 2 weeks since the funeral. 2 weeks since the press outlets ran headlines like "Wife rises from the grave to reclaim fortune, and death didn't stop her, but it might stop them." Vivian had gone silent. Charles had lawyered up. The public didn't know who to root for yet. I was the woman who faked her death, supposedly. At least that's what his team claimed. A manipulative act, a twisted form of extortion. No one asked why a woman would have to vanish just to survive her own marriage. But the court. The court only cared about one thing, proof. And I had brought a mountain. The bailiff called the room to order. I watched Charles walk in first. Clean-shaven. Crisp suit. Wearing his gilt like silk, barely wrinkled. Perfectly tailored. He didn't look at me. Vivian followed. Her eyes scanned the benches like she was still searching for a version of this story where I didn't show up. She didn't find it. They both sat at the defendant's table, surrounded by lawyers who whispered fast and breathed shallow. On my side, just me, and Claire Montgomery, my former legal intern, now my co-counsel, the only person I trusted to sit beside me while I took on a machine I helped build. Judge Mercer entered. She looked at me once. Her eyes didn't widen. Her lips didn't move. But the message was clear. Hold the line. Don't blink first. So I didn't. Opposing counsel opened with the expected that I'd faked my death, that I'd endangered public safety, that I was mentally unstable, that my will was invalid because I was no longer a credible entity, a non-person. I let them talk. I let them rot on the rope they were spinning. And then it was my turn. Claire rose. "Your Honor, we call Marina Hale to the stand." Gasps. Even now. Even here. Some still didn't believe. I walked slowly, deliberately. Every step a statement you tried to erase me. I'm back and I'm not hiding. I took the oath, hands steady, voice clear. I looked at Charles for the first time in weeks. He blinked hard. Not out of shame, out of calculation. I knew that look. He was trying to guess what I knew, what I'd found, what I could prove. He was late. Claire began. Mrs. Hale, for the record, where were you on the night of the car crash? I answered calmly. Driving home, alone, until the brakes failed. Did you later discover any foul play? Yes. A mechanic confirmed the lines were deliberately severed. The report is Exhibit 3B. And after the crash, I disappeared. Not because I wanted to fake my death, but because I realized someone my husband and my sister were trying to complete it. The courtroom shifted, a low murmur of realization. Claire handed me a folder. Please confirm, is this your original will? I opened it. Yes. My handwriting. My signature. Witnessed. Notarized. Dated 2 years before the forged version submitted after my death. And are the other documents in this folder financial statements? Emails? The psychiatric forgery authentic? I looked up at the judge. They are, every word of them. Charles's lawyer objected, Your Honor, this woman has no legal standing. She's been presumed dead. Her testimony is nothing more than theater. Judge Mercer leaned forward. Counselor, if this is theater, she just burned down the stage with your client still on it. She turned to me. Continue. Claire handed me one last item. Marina, what is this final document? I unfolded it slowly, held it like a sword made of paper. This is a corporate addendum, filed 5 years ago. It stipulates that any major asset transfers at Hale Coleman require dual signatures from both founders. And who are the founders? Myself and Charles Hale. I paused, let the silence work. No such transfer was authorized. Which means every share sold, every property liquidated, every trust dissolved was done in fraud. Claire stepped aside. No further questions. Further, the opposing lawyer stood, smug. Mrs. Hale. If you're to be believed, why didn't you go to the police? I did. I filed a sealed affidavit the night after my crash. I gave it to a private investigator, time-stamped and witnessed. We have the original recording. Why fake your death? I didn't. He scoffed. You disappeared. I survived. He paused. That word hit like a slap. You're saying your husband tried to kill you. I stared at Charles. I'm saying like my husband made it easier to believe I was dead than to ask why I was missing. That's not just betrayal, that's strategy. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed to sit taller. Charles finally stood. Your Honor, may I speak? His voice broke. First time I'd ever heard it falter without a script behind it. I loved her. I made mistakes. But this is vengeance. I rose from the stand. No, Charles. This is math. You forged my signature. You stole what wasn't yours. And now you're watching the balance being paid in full. He didn't reply. Because what do you say when the woman you buried walks back in with receipts? After court adjourned, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed. I didn't stop. I didn't owe the world a spectacle. They had already watched me die once. This time I was writing my return. That night, I stood in my hotel suite, folder open, documents spread out like war trophies. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Not weak, just worn. Like someone who'd spent too many nights alone in a city that forgot her name. But I hadn't come this far for applause. I came to finish the story. Vivian and Charles were still out there, still clinging to scraps of power. But tomorrow, the court would issue an injunction, freezing assets, launching criminal investigation. The tide wasn't turning, it had already collapsed. You don't feel triumph in a courtroom, not when the people who betrayed you are 2 feet away, pretending they don't know your favorite breakfast, your wedding song, or the way you used to fall asleep humming when the world got too loud. You don't feel closure. You feel cold. Because when you've clawed your way out of your own grave, you don't want justice, you want clarity, and I got it, in the form of a court order, signed by Judge Mercer, delivered to Vivian and Charles within 48 hours of the hearing. Their assets were frozen, bank accounts locked, passports flagged. The press hounded them, not with sympathy, but curiosity sharp as knives. Every charity, every client, every polished lie they had built cracked under scrutiny. What did I feel? Nothing. That's the thing about surviving your own death. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop hoping for guilt. You just move. Vivian cracked first. She tried to call me. 3 times. The 4th. She left a voicemail. Marina, I didn't know. Not at first. It was Charles. He said he told me you'd snapped, that you'd left, that you were going to ruin everything. I I didn't know until the money started moving, and then it was too late. I was scared. I deleted the message. Let me be clear, Vivian knew. She knew when she signed that false psychiatric form. She knew when she stood at my fake funeral and wore my necklace. She knew when she whispered to a banker in Geneva that my foundation needed to be restructured. You don't accidentally bury your sister. Charles didn't call. He sent a letter, handwritten, 3 pages long. He always did love the performance of paper. He said he regretted everything. He said it had started as a financial contingency, then a mistake, then a desperate attempt to hold on to the company. He ended with, "You were always more dangerous than I gave you credit for." I see that now. I folded the letter, burned it in the sink, not because I was angry, but because he was right. I didn't want Hale Coleman anymore. Too many ghosts, too many lies coded into the servers, into the architecture, into the bones. So I sold it to a competitor who promised to restructure it from the inside out with a new name, new purpose, and strict transparency. They paid in full. I made sure a portion of every deal would be funneled into women's legal aid clinics. Let Charles watch his empire fund the very women he tried to erase. Then came the house, the one Charles and I had shared, the one where I decorated the nursery that never came to be, the one where Vivian once cried in the guest room the night her engagement ended. And I held her hand until she fell asleep. It was in my name. They didn't know that, because the deed had never been transferred properly in the rush to settle my estate. So I walked in, unannounced. Vivian was on the balcony, drinking wine in my old robe. She turned, froze. "You have 10 minutes, I said." She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She packed. When she passed me in the hallway, she whispered, "Was it worth it?" I looked at her. The girl who once braided my hair, the woman who signed my death. And I said, "It wasn't revenge, Viv, it was return." I renovated the house. Not to stay, but to reclaim. Every portrait came down. Every monogrammed pillow. Every ivory curtain they bought after I died gone. In its place, I created something new. A center. A place for women like me erased, gaslit, destroyed on paper before they even knew they were in a war. I named it the Hale Center for Reclamation, not in honor, in warning. Let the world remember the name not as a dynasty but as a caution. On the 1-year anniversary of the crash, I held a private event at the gallery where they hosted my funeral. Only this time, I wasn't hiding behind a curtain. I stood at the podium, same marble floor, same velvet seats. But this time, my name was on the program for the right reasons. I told my story, not with bitterness, not with fire, with truth, with evidence, with the kind of voice that only rises after being buried beneath betrayal and silence for far too long. When the applause ended, someone asked, "Do you forgive them?" I paused. Forgiveness is not a door you walk through. It's a hallway you crawl through with splinters in your knees. So I said I don't need to. They'll live with what they did longer than I ever lived with what they took. What they took was not just money, not just my name. They took my identity, my autonomy, my right to grieve, to scream, to rage. But what I took back was everything that can't be stolen. I took back my story, my silence, my place in the world. And I didn't need fire to do it, just a voice and a plan. I live in the countryside now, under a different name, for peace, not fear. But I kept something from that time, something folded, tucked inside a drawer, the funeral invitation, the one with my name on it, the lie printed in silver. It reminds me. They tried to bury me, but I didn't rise from the ashes. I walked out of the fire holding receipts, and I never looked back.